"You should never sign anything before coffee, Mom." That was the first thing my son said to me on the morning of my 75th birthday, and somehow, before the sun had even fully risen over our quiet little street in Columbus, Ohio, I already felt like a stranger in my own kitchen. I remember standing there in my pale blue robe, one hand wrapped around a ceramic mug that said "World's Best Grandma," even though none of my grandchildren had visited in almost 6 months. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the air, but they weren't homemade. Jessica had picked them up from a bakery downtown. She didn't bake anymore. Not since she and Michael moved into my house 3 years ago, temporarily, after selling their condo. The envelope was sitting beside my plate before I even sat down. White, thick, sealed. My name typed neatly across the front like something from a bank or a hospital. Evelyn Carter. Michael smiled too quickly when he saw me looking at it. "Just routine paperwork," he said while pouring himself coffee. "We figured it'd be easier to take care of this today while everyone's here later." I looked toward Jessica. She was wiping an already clean countertop with slow, tight movements, avoiding my eyes. "What paperwork?" I asked. "Nothing stressful," she answered immediately, and that word stressful landed strangely in my chest because I hadn't sounded stressed. "Not yet." I sat down slowly and touched the envelope with my fingertips. The paper inside felt heavy. Important. The kind of documents people slide across polished tables in lawyer offices after someone dies. Outside, I could hear the neighbor's lawn sprinkler ticking softly against the pavement. Somewhere upstairs, my granddaughter Emily was still asleep. Everything looked normal. That was the unsettling part. Michael finally pulled out the chair across from me and sat down with a sigh. "Mom, you know we worry about you living alone someday." I stared at him for a moment. "I'm not living alone," I said quietly. His smile flickered for half a second. Jessica stopped wiping the counter. Silence settled over the kitchen like dust. Then Michael pushed the envelope gently toward me. "We just need a couple signatures so we can help manage things if anything ever happens." I opened the flap slowly, my fingers suddenly colder than they should have been in July. The first page was full of legal language I didn't recognize. Trust transfer. Durable authority. Asset management. My eyes drifted toward the final page automatically, and that was when my stomach tightened, because at the bottom of the signature line was my name. Not signed by hand. Copied. Scanned. Like someone had already practiced becoming me before asking permission. I did not say another word after I saw my copied signature at the bottom of those papers. At 75 years old, you learn that silence can tell you far more than questions ever will. Michael kept stirring sugar into his coffee even though he drank it black for most of his life. Jessica finally turned around from the counter and forced a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You do not have to read all of that now," she said gently. "We just thought it would make things easier for everyone later on." Easier for everyone. Not better for me. Not safer for me. Easier. I closed the folder carefully and slid it back across the table. "I think I would like to look it over first," I said. The air in the kitchen changed immediately. It was subtle, but I felt it. Jessica crossed her arms tightly against herself while Michael leaned back in his chair with a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "Mom," he said slowly, "it is mostly standard estate stuff. We already talked to somebody about it." "Somebody. Not your lawyer. Not our family attorney. Just somebody." I looked around my kitchen while he spoke. The yellow curtains I had sewn 20 years ago were gone now, replaced with gray linen panels Jessica picked out last winter. The old clock Frank and I bought during our anniversary trip to Vermont had disappeared from the wall too. Even my husband's framed military photo had been moved from the living room mantel to a shelf near the basement stairs where nobody ever looked. Little by little, the house had stopped looking like my life. I just had not wanted to admit it before. Jessica opened the refrigerator and spoke without facing me. "We are only trying to help because you get overwhelmed with paperwork." I almost laughed at that. I had balanced checkbooks, mortgage payments, taxes, insurance forms, and hospital bills long before either of them knew how to fill out a credit card application. But that was the trick people used when someone reached a certain age. They spoke to you gently enough that outsiders would think they were caring, while quietly reducing you one small piece at a time. Michael glanced at his watch. "We can finish it tonight," he said. The family will already be here for dinner anyway. Finish it. As though the decision had already been made. I stood up slowly and carried my coffee cup to the sink. My reflection caught faintly in the kitchen window above it. White hair. Thin shoulders. Soft wrinkles around tired eyes. Maybe they looked at me and saw someone fading away. But what unsettled me most was not the paperwork anymore. It was the realization that neither of them seemed nervous about asking me to sign it. They seemed nervous about me taking time to read it. By noon, the house no longer felt like mine at all. Cars began pulling into the driveway one after another while Jessica rushed around pretending to prepare for my birthday dinner. Although most of the food had clearly come from catering trays stacked inside the refrigerator. I stayed upstairs longer than usual, sitting quietly in my bedroom while voices drifted through the vents from downstairs. Laughter. Cabinet doors closing. The sharp sound of Jessica giving instructions to somebody in the kitchen. At one point, I opened my closet looking for the cream-colored sweater Frank bought me years ago in Cape Cod, only to realize it was gone. I stood there staring at the empty hangar space far longer than I should have. When I finally went downstairs, Emily was sitting alone near the staircase scrolling on her phone. The moment she saw me, her face softened. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she whispered before hugging me carefully. She smelled like vanilla shampoo and laundry detergent. Familiar. Honest. "Thank you, sweetheart," I told her. "You look tired," she said quietly as she pulled back. Before I could answer, Jessica appeared carrying flower arrangements toward the dining room. "Emily, can you help with the glasses instead of sitting around?" she snapped. Emily immediately stood and walked away without arguing. I watched her disappear into the kitchen, shoulders slightly tense. Jessica noticed me looking. "Teenagers," she said with a fake laugh, completely glued to their phones. Then her eyes moved toward the folder still sitting on the side table near the living room. "Did you get a chance to finish reading those papers?" There it was again. Not "how are you feeling?" Not "are you enjoying your birthday?" Only the papers. I smiled politely. "Not yet." Something flickered across her face before disappearing almost instantly. "Well, Michael really worked hard setting all of this up for you." I looked around the room. My room. Or what used to feel like mine. The furniture had slowly changed over the years too. Frank's leather recliner was gone now. Jessica said it looked outdated. The old family quilts had disappeared from the couch. Even the scent of the house had changed from lavender and coffee to expensive candles that smelled like hotels. Michael came downstairs a few minutes later wearing the blue button-down shirt I bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. "Mom," he said warmly, "people are going to start eating around 5. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "Maybe we can handle the paperwork before everybody gets here." Handle the paperwork. As though I were another unfinished errand on his list. I studied my son carefully then. Really studied him. The gray beginning near his temples. The expensive watch he definitely could not afford on a realtor's commission lately. The nervous way his fingers tapped against his coffee mug. And suddenly, for the first time all day, I stopped feeling confused. Confused people hesitate. But deep down, something inside me had already begun understanding exactly what was happening in this house. Around 4 in the afternoon, while Jessica was outside arranging flower pots near the front porch for guests, I carried the folder upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door quietly behind me. My hands felt steadier now. Fear had begun turning into something colder, something clearer. I sat at the small writing desk beside the window where Frank used to pay our bills every Sunday night while listening to baseball games on the radio. The desk lamp still had a tiny scratch near the base from when Michael knocked it over as a little boy chasing the dog through the hallway. Funny how a person can remember details from 40 years ago, but still get treated like they cannot understand paperwork sitting directly in front of them. I opened the folder slowly and began reading line by line this time. Trust reassignment. Durable power of attorney. Property transfer authorization. Temporary management rights. The language twisted itself into polite legal phrases, but the meaning underneath became impossible to ignore. If I signed those documents, Michael would gain authority over nearly everything I owned. The house. My retirement accounts. Even medical decisions if somebody declared me mentally unfit later on. I felt my chest tighten slightly when I reached page 6. There, attached neatly behind another form, was an estimated market valuation of my house. $480,000. Listed with projected resale recommendations. My birthday dinner suddenly made a lot more sense. This was not preparation for my future. This was preparation for their future after removing me from it. A car door slammed outside. Voices drifted faintly from the driveway as more relatives arrived. I kept reading. Then I noticed something else. In the upper corner of one document was the name of a law office downtown I did not recognize. Carter & Wells Property Solutions. I frowned immediately. Frank and I had worked with Harold Bennett for over 30 years. Harold handled our wills, taxes, insurance disputes, everything. Michael knew that, which meant there was a reason they had avoided using him. I picked up my phone from the desk and stared at Harold's number still saved in my contacts. My thumb hovered above the screen for several seconds before I finally pressed call. The phone rang twice. Harold Bennett speaking. Hearing his voice almost made me emotional with relief. Steady. Familiar. Honest. Harold, I said. Quietly, lowering my voice though nobody could hear me upstairs. This is Evelyn Carter. I need to ask you something before I sign anything today. Silence settled briefly on the other end before his tone changed completely. Evelyn, he said carefully, whatever they placed in front of you, do not sign it until I see it first. And for the first time all day, somebody sounded worried for me instead of impatient with me. Harold asked me to read several sections of the paperwork aloud while guests continued arriving downstairs beneath my bedroom window. Every few moments I could hear car doors shutting, laughter near the porch, dishes clinking in the kitchen. It sounded like a celebration. But sitting there at my desk with those papers spread in front of me, I realized my birthday dinner had become something else entirely. Page 4, Harold said carefully through the phone. Read the paragraph under temporary incapacity clause. I adjusted my glasses and read the legal wording slowly. The longer I spoke, the quieter Harold became on the other end. Finally, he interrupted me gently. Evelyn, do you understand what this allows your son to do? Not completely, I admitted. It sounds like he could manage things for me if I became ill. Harold exhaled heavily. It gives him authority to transfer your assets into a family trust controlled primarily by him. My stomach tightened again. Could he sell the house? Silence. Then came the answer I already feared. Yes. Outside my bedroom door, footsteps crossed the hallway. I lowered my voice instinctively. Without my permission? Harold paused carefully before responding. Once certain conditions are declared regarding your capacity, it becomes legally complicated. Capacity. Such a polite word for stripping somebody of control over their own life. I looked down at my trembling hands resting against the papers. Frank and I bought this house in 1981 when Michael was in middle school. We painted every room ourselves because we could not afford contractors back then. Frank planted the maple tree in the front yard the year Michael graduated high school. Every inch of this home carried pieces of our life inside it. And downstairs, my own son was waiting for me to sign documents that could take it away. There is something else, Harold said quietly. You mentioned they used another law office? Yes. I know Carter & Wells. They specialize in property restructuring and elder asset transition cases. The way he said elder made my chest ache. Harold, I whispered. Are you telling me they are trying to put me somewhere? He did not answer immediately, which frightened me more than if he had spoken right away. Finally he said very carefully, I am saying these documents appear designed to move financial control away from you as quickly as possible. Downstairs, Jessica's voice floated upward brightly. Everyone, dinner will be around 5:30. I could hear people laughing again. Plates moving. A birthday song playing softly through the speakers in the living room. The normalness of it all suddenly felt unbearable. Harold cleared his throat gently. Evelyn, do not confront them yet. And absolutely do not sign anything tonight. I stared toward my bedroom door. For the first time all day, I no longer felt like an elderly woman being pressured by family. I felt like someone standing inside a house where a decision about my future had already been made without me. After I hung up with Harold, I remained seated at the desk for several minutes staring at the paperwork while the sounds of my birthday dinner drifted up from downstairs. The temptation to walk straight into that dining room and confront Michael burned inside my chest harder with every passing second. I wanted to ask him how long he had been planning this. I wanted to ask Jessica whether she ever truly intended for me to remain in this house at all. But another feeling had begun settling over me too. Caution. Harold's voice kept repeating in my mind. Do not confront them yet. So instead, I carefully placed every document back inside the folder exactly the way I found it. Then I walked into my bathroom, splashed cool water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. If they believed I was becoming weak, confused, forgetful, maybe that belief could become useful. By the time I came downstairs, the dining room candles had been lit and relatives were filling plates from the buffet along the kitchen counter. Jessica immediately spotted me. There she is, she announced brightly. We were starting to worry about you. Worry. Another word people use when they really mean control. Michael approached with that same careful smile he had worn all day. You feeling all right, Mom? I nodded slowly and touched my forehead lightly. Just a little overwhelmed with all the paperwork earlier, I said softly. Some of those legal words get confusing. I watched both of them carefully after I said it. Relief. Actual relief flashed across Jessica's face before she quickly hid it behind concern. That is exactly why we are trying to help, she said gently, rubbing my shoulder as though comforting a child. I nearly shivered from the performance of it. During dinner, I became quieter on purpose. I repeated myself once or twice intentionally. When my cousin Diane asked whether I wanted more iced tea, I answered a few seconds too slowly. Michael and Jessica exchanged subtle glances every time it happened. They thought they were watching me decline. In reality, I was watching them relax. The more uncertain I appeared, the less careful they became. Halfway through dinner, Michael leaned toward me and lowered his voice. Maybe after dessert we can finish signing everything while everybody is still here. I gave a small tired smile. If you think that is best, sweetheart. That nearly did it. Jessica's entire posture softened instantly, like someone finally seeing the finish line after a long race. She even poured me another glass of wine herself, though she normally complained about me drinking more than half a glass at my age. Then, while everyone continued talking around the table, I noticed something strange near the hallway entrance. Emily was standing there silently holding her phone against her chest, staring directly at her parents with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not embarrassment, not irritation, fear. Dessert arrived 20 minutes later on my good china plates that Jessica normally refused to use because she said they were too old-fashioned. The irony almost made me smile. Chocolate cake. Vanilla ice cream melting around the edges. 75 candles would have looked ridiculous, so they placed only 2 numbers on top instead. 7 and 5. Everyone gathered around the dining room while Michael dimmed the lights. People sang. Phones came out for pictures. I smiled when expected and thanked everyone politely, but the entire time I could feel tension underneath the celebration, like a wire pulled too tight beneath the floorboards. Michael kept glancing toward the folder resting on the buffet table beside the dining room wall. Jessica noticed every time I touched my wine glass but barely looked at my face otherwise. Even my cousin Diane seemed uncomfortable, though I doubted she understood why. Then came the moment I think they had planned all along. Michael stood beside me holding his champagne glass and smiled warmly toward the room. Before we finish tonight, he announced casually, Jessica and I wanted to help Mom organize a few future planning documents. Nothing dramatic. Just making sure everything is easier for her down the road. He laughed lightly after saying it, inviting everyone else to treat it casually too. A few relatives nodded politely. Somebody murmured that it sounded responsible. I sat very still in my chair while Jessica immediately stepped forward carrying the folder toward the table like she had rehearsed the timing. It is honestly just basic estate organization, she explained smoothly. At Evelyn's age, unexpected things can happen, and we want to make sure she is protected. At Evelyn's age. Not Mom. Not Evelyn. Suddenly I was simply an elderly situation being managed. Michael pulled a pen from his pocket and placed it gently beside my dessert plate. We can knock it out in 5 minutes, he said quietly. Then everybody can relax. The room became strangely silent after that. Nobody wanted to look directly at me anymore. They all stared at their forks or napkins instead, like passengers pretending not to notice turbulence on an airplane. I looked down at the paperwork again while Jessica leaned closer beside my chair. You said yourself that legal language gets Confusing, she whispered softly enough for only me to hear. That is why Michael should handle things before it becomes stressful for you. Stressful for me. Convenient for them. Across the room, Emily suddenly stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Everyone turned toward her. Her face looked pale. I need some air, she muttered before quickly walking toward the hallway. Jessica's expression hardened instantly. Emily, she snapped quietly, but the girl kept walking. And as she disappeared toward the back door, I noticed something in her trembling hand. Her phone, held tightly against her chest like it contained something dangerous. I looked from the hallway toward the back door where Emily had disappeared, then back down at the pen sitting beside my plate. Michael noticed the hesitation immediately. Mom? He asked softly, still smiling for the benefit of everyone watching. You okay? I folded my napkin carefully onto the table and gave a small embarrassed laugh. I think I need a minute too, I said. All these papers and conversations tonight have made my head spin a little. Jessica moved instantly into her performance again. See, she said gently to the table, though loud enough for everyone to hear. This is exactly why we are trying to simplify things for her. Simplify things for her. As though I were no longer sitting there listening. My cousin Diane nodded sympathetically. Getting older is not easy, she said quietly. I smiled politely, but inside something sharp settled deeper into my chest. There is a particular kind of humiliation that comes when people begin discussing your decline, while you are still fully present in the room. Michael touched my shoulder. Maybe after tonight we should seriously talk about reducing some stress in your life. Jessica lowered herself into the chair beside me and crossed one leg neatly over the other. There are wonderful communities now, she added carefully. Beautiful assisted living places with activities, healthcare staff, transportation. Her voice softened even more. People your age are often happier once they stop carrying the burden of maintaining a large home alone. My age. Burden. Large home. Every word sounded polished and compassionate on the surface, but underneath I could hear the real message clearly now. You do not belong here anymore. Around the table, relatives avoided eye contact again. Nobody wanted conflict at a birthday dinner. Nobody wanted to believe a son and daughter-in-law might be slowly maneuvering an elderly woman out of her own life. And perhaps part of them believed Michael and Jessica were being responsible. After all, people trust younger voices, younger confidence, younger certainty. I glanced toward Frank's empty chair at the far end of the dining room table. Even after 7 years without him, I still sometimes expected to hear his fork scrape against the plate or his quiet laugh during family dinners. He would have seen through this immediately. Frank had always been able to recognize greed hiding behind politeness. Jessica suddenly picked up the folder again and slid it closer toward me. You do not have to understand every detail, she said softly. That is why Michael is here to help. Something inside me almost broke at those words. Not because they sounded cruel. Because they sounded practiced, repeated, like conversations they had already rehearsed privately many times before tonight. Then from the dark hallway near the back door, Emily's voice suddenly cut through the room. Dad, she said shakily, I think Grandma deserves to know what you were saying yesterday. Every head at the table turned toward her at once. And for the first time all evening, Michael looked genuinely afraid. The room went completely still after Emily spoke. Even the music playing softly from the living room speakers seemed suddenly too loud. Michael stood up so quickly his chair legs scraped hard against the hardwood floor. Emily, he said sharply, forcing a nervous laugh afterward. Now is not the time. But Emily did not move. She remained standing near the hallway entrance clutching her phone with both hands. Her face looked pale and frightened. Yet there was something else there too. Determination. Jessica rose from her chair slowly, her voice immediately turning calm and controlled again. Sweetheart, your grandmother does not need extra stress tonight. Extra stress. As though truth itself had become inappropriate dinner conversation. Emily looked directly at me instead of her parents. Grandma, she said quietly. Yesterday I came home early from class and heard them talking in the kitchen. Michael's entire expression tightened. Enough, he snapped. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My cousin Diane lowered her fork onto her plate without making eye contact with anyone. Nobody wanted to become involved, but nobody could pretend the atmosphere at the table was normal anymore either. Emily swallowed hard. Dad said once the papers were signed, it would be easier to move you somewhere smaller before winter. My chest felt suddenly hollow. Smaller. Not safer. Not happier. Smaller. Jessica immediately stepped forward. That is not what we meant, she interrupted smoothly. Emily overheard part of a conversation and misunderstood. But Emily shook her head. I also heard you talking about selling the house. Silence crashed across the dining room again. Michael rubbed both hands over his face quickly before forcing another exhausted sigh. Mom, he said, turning toward me now. This is exactly why we were trying to organize everything carefully instead of causing confusion. Confusion. Another carefully chosen word. He walked closer to my chair and lowered his voice as though speaking to someone fragile. Nobody is trying to hurt you. We are trying to plan responsibly. I looked up at my son then. Truly looked at him. I remembered the little boy who used to wait by the front window every Friday evening for Frank to come home from work. I remembered helping him practice multiplication tables at this same dining room table. I remembered paying his college tuition by working extra nursing shifts after Frank's back injury. And now here he stood speaking to me like an obstacle standing between him and a financial transaction. Jessica folded her arms tightly. Maintaining this house is becoming unrealistic for someone your age, she said carefully. You forget things sometimes. You get overwhelmed easily. Around the table, a few relatives finally glanced toward me with something close to pity. Not outrage. Not support. Pity. And in that moment I realized the most painful part was not the betrayal itself. It was understanding how easily people accept the idea that elderly women should quietly surrender control over their own lives. I do not know how long the silence lasted after Jessica spoke about me, as though I were already halfway gone from my own life. Maybe 5 seconds. Maybe 15. Long enough for every person at that table to feel the discomfort settling into the room like smoke. Then I reached slowly for the pen beside my dessert plate. Michael immediately relaxed. I saw it happen right in front of me. His shoulders loosened. Jessica finally exhaled softly through her nose. Around the table, relatives looked relieved too, grateful the uncomfortable moment might finally pass. I held the pen carefully between my fingers and looked down at the papers again. You are right about one thing, I said quietly. Michael leaned closer. About what, Mom? I lifted my eyes toward him. At my age, I have learned not to sign anything until I fully understand who benefits from it. His smile faded slightly. Jessica stepped in smoothly. Evelyn, nobody is trying to take advantage of you. I nodded slowly. I know. Then I reached beside my chair toward the small leather handbag hanging there and removed another folder. Thicker. Dark blue. Harold had emailed the documents to a nearby print shop an hour earlier after our phone call, and during the confusion after dinner started, I quietly asked the teenage son of our next-door neighbor to pick them up for me. People underestimate elderly women constantly. They forget we survived entire lifetimes before smartphones existed. We know how to solve problems quietly. I placed the blue folder gently on the table. Michael frowned immediately. What is that? Protection, I answered calmly. Jessica's expression sharpened. What does that mean? I opened the folder carefully and slid several papers across the table toward them. Harold's firm letterhead sat clearly at the top of every page. Amendment of estate authority. Revocation of transfer consent. Updated will and property trust designation. Michael stared down at the documents without moving. I watched the color slowly leave his face. Mom, he whispered. After speaking with Harold today, I continued quietly, I decided to make a few changes of my own. Jessica grabbed the first page quickly, scanning the text with widening eyes. You changed the trust? She asked sharply before catching herself. Several relatives looked up immediately at her tone. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Yes. Michael looked genuinely shaken now. Without even talking to us? The question almost made me laugh. As though I had not spent the entire day being maneuvered like furniture inside my own home. Emily stepped quietly farther into the dining room then, still clutching her phone tightly against her chest. But now her expression carried relief instead of fear. Jessica turned another page frantically. "You removed us?" she asked in disbelief. I met her eyes steadily across the table. "No," I said softly. "I removed anyone who saw my life as a transaction instead of a family." Michael stared at the documents in front of him like he no longer recognized the room around him. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again without words. For the first time all evening, the confident tone he had carefully maintained disappeared completely. Jessica recovered faster. She always did. She placed the papers back onto the table with controlled movements and forced another calm smile toward the relatives still sitting frozen around us. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," she said carefully. Nobody was trying to pressure Evelyn. Pressure. Such a gentle word for what they had done all day. Emily suddenly stepped farther into the room. "That is not true," she said quietly. Everyone turned toward her again. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her phone screen. "I heard both of you yesterday in the kitchen." Michael's face changed immediately. Emily, stop. But she did not. Instead, she looked directly at me with watery eyes. "Grandma, I did not know how to tell you." Then she pressed play. The recording was not perfect. Dishes clattered faintly in the background and cabinet doors opened somewhere off to the side, but the voices were unmistakable. Jessica's came first. "Once she signs everything over, we can finally stop pretending this house is temporary." Then Michael answered in a tired voice I barely recognized. "I just do not want this dragged out for years." Jessica laughed softly afterward. "The assisted living place near Dayton already said they have openings after summer." My cousin Diane covered her mouth with one hand. Across the table somebody whispered, "Oh my God." Michael stood up abruptly. "That conversation is out of context." But even he sounded unsure of himself now. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You talked about Grandma like she was not even a person anymore." Jessica folded her arms tightly. "Emily, you are being emotional." "No," Emily whispered. "You are cruel." Silence spread across the dining room again. Heavier this time. Not awkward anymore. Final. The kind of silence that arrives when people suddenly realize they have witnessed the truth too clearly to ignore it afterward. Michael looked toward me then, and something inside him finally cracked. "Mom," he said weakly, "I was trying to make things easier." Easier for who, I almost asked. But I already knew the answer. He rubbed both hands over his face and sat back down heavily in his chair. Suddenly he looked older than he had an hour earlier. Smaller too. Not because he regretted hurting me. Because his plan had failed publicly. Jessica still tried to salvage control. "Evelyn, you know how stressful caregiving can become for families." I looked at her calmly. "You were not planning to care for me," I said softly. "You were planning to replace me." Nobody spoke after that. The birthday candles had long since melted into crooked wax puddles beside the untouched cake. And sitting there at the head of my own dining room table, I realized something strange. I did not feel devastated anymore. I felt free. 3 weeks after my birthday dinner, I woke up to the sound of seagulls outside my bedroom window instead of arguments downstairs. The little coastal town in Maine was quieter than Ohio, slower too. Most mornings, fog rolled in from the water before sunrise and drifted across the harbor like soft gray fabric. I rented a small white cottage less than half a mile from the ocean with blue shutters and a porch barely large enough for 2 rocking chairs. It was not extravagant. It was peaceful. And after everything that happened, peace felt far more valuable than square footage ever could. Harold helped me finalize every legal document within days after the dinner. The house in Columbus remained mine entirely. Michael and Jessica moved out the following month after realizing there would be no trust fund waiting for them, no property transfer, no quiet surrender from the elderly woman they had already begun treating like a fading inconvenience. Michael called several times afterward. First angry, then defensive, eventually apologetic. But there is a difference between regret and disappointment. He regretted losing access to my assets. I never truly felt he understood what he had lost emotionally. Emily visited me twice already since I moved. The second visit lasted an entire weekend. We walked along the harbor together eating clam chowder from paper cups while cold wind blew strands of hair across her face. One afternoon she asked me softly, "Do you think Dad ever loved this house the way Grandpa did?" I thought about that for a long moment before answering. "I think your father loved what the house represented," I said quietly. "Security, stability, comfort. But your grandfather loved the people inside it first." Emily nodded slowly like somebody much older than 19. Sometimes pain matures people too quickly. The strange thing is, I do not spend much time feeling angry anymore. Hurt, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But not angry. Because reaching 75 taught me something nobody explains when you are younger. Betrayal does not suddenly appear one day without warning. It grows quietly through small moments people ignore. The dismissive comments. The impatience. The conversations held slightly out of your hearing range. The subtle way people begin discussing your future, as though your voice no longer belongs in it. I make coffee every morning now and sit on my porch facing the Atlantic Ocean while fishing boats drift across the horizon. Sometimes I bring out Frank's old photograph and place it beside my cup just to keep him company while the sun rises. And every now and then, I think back to that birthday dinner and realize something that still surprises me. Losing the illusion of my family's intentions hurt deeply. But losing the fear of being alone saved my life.